Hey, Rebel ladies. I know a few of you have talked about writing a book, and I've always wondered how I could help you with that. Well, today's guest is the woman to do just that. Not only does she have her own publishing company, how inspiring is that? But she helped other authors get their books out there and get them written. So if you're thinking you might really, really want to do this, now is the time to really tune in and listen. So welcome to the Rebel Tribe podcast, where empowerment meets attitude and sass meets savvy. We are not your mama's podcast, folks. We are a virtual tribe of fierce females ready to conquer the world. So join us as we smash through those stereotypes, break those barriers, and redefine what it means to be a woman in today's world. So get ready to see more, get ready to do more, and most importantly, get ready to be everything you were meant to be with the Rebel Tribe podcast. It's time to unleash your inner rebel and let's rock the world on your terms. So my guest today is Amanda, say that three times fast. Amanda Nell Edgar. And she is the owner and founder of a beautiful publishing company. And I'm going to let her tell you all about it. I'm not even going to tell you the name of it. I'm going to let her because well, Page and Podium. It's like it covers everything that you do. So it's, you see all these other publishing companies that are kind of like, yeah, Page and Podium. It just really sums up everything. Okay.
Yeah, and we've got that alliteration, especially if you do Page and Podium Press. Yep.
It's perfect. It's perfect. So if you'd like to take a few minutes just to tell us about yourself, and then let's get right into some discussions about what you do and how you do it and how you can help my ladies.
Yeah, sure. Well, I am a three-time traditionally published author. Two of my books are award-winning books. I write mostly about social issues as well as, things like being in touch with yourself, knowing who you are, trusting your own judgment, that kind of thing. My publishing company follows very much the same type of guidelines. We work with people who want to use their stories to change the world. So we have a variety of ways that we help people do that, all the way from our group program for women, and newly we're adding men in December who want to write their life stories with group support and professional training. All the way through, we will write and publish your entire book for you, and you can just hang out and watch TV while we do it.
Where were you when I was writing mine? Okay, so I love the name. So before we do anything else, please tell me how you came up with Page and Podium because I really do. I love the name and I love language and words. So yes, I love the alliteration, Page and Podium Press. It's so yes, please explain where that came from.
Absolutely. Well, so as I said, we work with people who want to use their stories to change the world. So very often with books, that includes not only getting that book out, making sure that it's in front of the readers who need it, but often you're also going to be pairing that with some sort of speaking. So that either is live speaking, it can be podcasting. I'm seeing a lot of people who are doing short Instagram or TikTok reels. But what we've found is that most of the time, folks are going to be out there talking about their story as well as writing their book. So when I was rebranding our company in, I guess it's been now about a year, I was really just brainstorming. I think there were maybe 75 options we had. And I'll tell you, once I found Page and Podium, I thought, oh my gosh, that's it. We don't need to look anymore.
That's perfect because yes, that's one thing I discovered when I published my first book was they also wanted me to speak and I was not very good at it. It rather terrified me actually. So anything and they did not offer that as any kind of assistance. It was like, here, go talk about your book. Well, go talk about your book. I said, thank you. What do I talk about? What do I say? So
Right.
I love the fact that you help the people with that. Now,
Mhm.
you spent 15 years in academia before you founded your company. What inspired you to make that transition?
Yeah, well, it was really fairly seamless in that all the things I was doing as an academic, writing books, giving feedback to other people's books and articles, coaching and mentoring graduate students, and eventually newer faculty who needed to learn to write and publish books and articles. All that stuff is what I do now. And essentially, the way that it happened was pretty organic. When you're an academic, you are writing all the time. So I'm big on, celebrating all the little wins, making sure that you're keeping your folks updated. So as part of being an academic, I ran a writing group called the Write On. group. And during that time, I was posting a lot about how we were meeting and we were working together. Did anyone need support? And folks just started reaching out to me, asking for one-on-one help, asking for editing, and then eventually asking if I could just write the project for them. And there were a lot of things to love about academia, but I really felt like I had done the time that I needed to do in that career. And it was time to do something else. I love to learn. I'm a lifelong learner, and I was just honestly a little bit bored. I felt like I needed a new challenge. I needed to learn a totally new industry, and certainly entrepreneurship is that.
So how do you guide your authors through the process of confronting? Because if you're writing your life story, you're probably confronting maybe some very difficult personal experiences. How do you guide them through that and help them turn that into a powerful, inspiring story?
Yeah, so there really are two components. The first is we have a really dialed in system to help people figure out how to make their story into something people want to read. So that is called the memoir method, and that's the same name as our group program, the memoir method. And that is a series. In the beginning, people go through a series of 8 or 9 steps where we are having you dump out all the stuff that you want to talk about, figure out what the cohesive message is, figure out the start and end and the kind of hot spot points in the middle, and then eventually come up with a full outline. So that's the technical part. But I love that you're also getting at the emotional part, because that is totally a real thing. What I find is that usually the first few chapters, folks are pretty good with those. Oftentimes we've rehearsed them in our mind, right? Like we kind of know what we want to say. It is usually around that midpoint, which in a strong narrative, the midpoint is sort of the point at which you take your agency. You start to be the one that's in control of things. Usually I find around there is when that kind of emotional difficulty starts to collide so the emotional difficulty of your memories starts to collide with the emotional difficulty of being so tired of writing your book. So really, that is just about relationships for us. In our group program and in our one-on-one, we just really try to get to know people. In fact, before you ever work with us, we send out a survey and we ask, what do you need if you start to really struggle? How will we know when you start to struggle? Are you going to ghost us? Are you going to be, asking a lot of questions that are kind of trying to procrastinate? What happens with you? We just really want to make sure that we tailor it to people, because there's unfortunately no one size fits all advice for working through really trauma in many cases for our clients.
Now, you wrote a book not too long ago about, I'm going to say, a period of time that was traumatic for a very large portion of the community. Even if you weren't an actual member of that community, still, just to see this happening all around you, it was hard. And that is the summer of 2020. George Floyd and the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. I've been reading it, and it's amazing. And it
Oh,
tackles
thank
such
you.
a pivotal moment in modern history. Why did you
Yeah.
pick that subject, and what was the most challenging part of co-authoring that project?
Yeah, well, and shout out to my co-author, Dr. Andre E. Johnson. Will actually be headed to the Southern Festival of Books with an invited appearance on C-SPAN. So very exciting. Tune in. You can check out our book talk there. So when I first became an academic, as in terms of a professional academic, I'd gotten a job at University of Memphis as an assistant professor. And at that same time, my co-author started as well. So we met and really hit it off, just even in orientation stuff. And that was around the time that kind of first wave of Black Lives Matter was coming about, when really you were seeing it on, Facebook or whatever social media you were on, really hearing people say Black Lives Matter for the first time. So that was also at that time when we were hearing people say all lives matter. So Andre and I were kind of wondering, what is really happening here? There was a lot of sort of conjecture on social media of, what do people mean when they say all lives matter? Are they tearing people down? What's happening? So we wrote our first book together back in it was published in 2018. And that book was on Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter. We really wanted to look at that clash. But of course, as the years go on, all social movements develop and change and grow, or in the case of Black Lives Matter, kind of fade and resurge. Well, we had already been talking about doing a follow-up, a sequel to our first Black Lives Matter book when 2020 hit. When we had, the murder of George Floyd, we had Breonna Taylor's death, Ahmaud Arbery, and of course, we had a pandemic. All of the things seem to be kind of converging. So we knew we had to grab that moment. So even during the pandemic, even when people were still learning to use Zoom, we started just putting out calls, who wants to talk to us? And we really wanted to and did get a whole range of folks. So people that had been organizers really professionally or, just very dedicated for decades, all the way through to people who were first moved to participate with that 2020 moment. So really, we just wanted to capture it. I think it's very important to capture history and what's happening kind of in our culture as it's happening, because we can't ever get it back. And I'll say, even in the time between when we drafted and when the publisher sent us our full proofs to look at, which is quite a long time, by the way, I even was looking at it and thinking like, oh my gosh, you know what? I forgot that we were fighting over toilet paper. I I blocked it out of my mind, right? So it's when you look back at the real-time memories of what people were saying, how they were describing their experiences, that to me is so, so important to have that slice of life. That's what we really tried to capture with that book.
How are you hoping it's going to further impact the conversation on racial justice and social change? Because it's raising its head again during this election cycle. There's a lot of talk about racial justice and again, Black Lives Matter, Hispanic Lives Matter, all lives matter.
Mm-hmm.
How are you hoping to have an impact on that with your book?
Yeah, well, we already have heard from activists who have reached out and said, this was really helpful. My co-author actually was able to sign and gift a copy of the book to George Floyd's brother, which was one of the most amazing, text images I've ever gotten on my phone. And he also, has spoken to a lot of different organizers. Now that I'm out of the academic world, I'm just honestly not quite as engaged in the promotion as I would really like to be. But we are hearing good things about how the things that we wrote about, sort of how do new people get drawn into the movement? How do folks interpret diversity within the movement? And how do we address that? Things like having a march. How do we invite folks who can't walk long distances into a march? That was not something that we really saw talked about a lot in written word. But then when we talked to people, that came up. So we're sort of documenting all of these things that really need to be considered if we want to make sure that movements themselves are as equitable and accessible as we want the entire world to be.
So I hear you preparing for a third follow-on book?
I don't know if we'll do that. I'm not sure. I'm working on my memoir. So I've got to do that first. I learned a while back. I tried to do two books at one time. It went okay, but I'm not doing two books at one time really ever again. I'm going to knock this one out first and then we'll see what's next.
Well, you talk about helping your authors prepare to be speakers, and you are a speaker yourself. So you've spoken at a wide range of organizations, FedEx to the U.S. Department of State. That's quite a range there. How do you tailor your message on identity and leadership and storytelling to such a wide range of audiences?
Yeah, well, I find that most of the time when folks approach me and ask me to speak, they have a very specific agenda. Now, as you know, usually, people will kind of come with an agenda. You've got to dig a little bit to see really what they want. It's oftentimes not exactly what they're saying. But for instance, with the Department of State, that was an instance in which myself and another colleague that I've done some research with, we were approached to talk about how counterterrorism needs to take into account differences in cultural identity. If we are going to target folks who would be targeted by terrorist organizations and try to get them not on the terrorist side, we really have to understand what those folks' identity are, what they're going through, what their experiences are, all the way back from childhood to now. So we were really talking about kind of how are those experiences carried and how could the State Department use the knowledge of those experiences to make sure that their messages were really well tailored and that the storytelling was really precise and clear. So in that case, we were talking a lot about kind of how do we think about what music choices, how do we think about what image choices. On the other hand, FedEx came to me around 2020 and said, we really need a training on what white people are supposed to be doing during this Black Lives Matter uprising. So that is a really similar thing to me. I think whenever you are targeting a group and trying to persuade them, you can't just beat people over the head with stuff. Often that has the opposite reaction of what you're trying to do. So in that case, I was talking about, how do we think about what we want as individual people for our world? I think, maybe I'm naive, I think most people do the best they can and want the best for most other people. We disagree, of course. This is very obvious in this election season. We disagree on how to do that, but there is a common thread. There is a common humanity, and recognizing that really is the way forward. So hopefully, you can kind of see it's a similar message. It's caring, love, joy, oftentimes, and community is at the center of all of my talks, but the context is going to vary. And because what I'm preaching, what I'm telling people to do is to think about really their audience, think about what they want. That's what I do too. And honestly, it's pretty instinctive for me. I really like to get to know people and really think about kind of what makes them tick. So a lot of times I'm able to either kind of adapt on the fly or, prepare based on what I know about the audience.
Okay, that intrigues me a little because I wasn't aware that as a white person I was supposed to be doing anything different during. I'm sorry, what was I supposed to be doing? So what key
Mhm.
takeaways did you try to get FedEx to understand and take away from that? Because that to me sounds like a very odd request for a speaker to come in. That's I don't know, that just kind of
Interesting.
boggles my mind.
I'm
Okay.
s- well, I wonder if I didn't maybe present the problem very well. I'm surprised to hear that. I mean, I think a lot of people around that 2020 uprising, I mean, there was all the talk, if you remember, about the white fragility book that was really big, and a lot of white folks really took offense to that. I have my own issues, by the way, with Robin DiAngelo and that book, so this is in no way a defense. But I do think the term white fragility is a little bit riles people up a little bit. So there was a little bit of, especially FedEx is in Memphis. So there's a real existing racial conflict in Memphis that's from the founding of that city, right? So there was a real kind of push-pull. So should white people be trying to fight for racial justice, or is doing that just re-perpetuating the fact that white people always want to be at the center of stuff? How do we kind of think about that? And then, of course, people don't want to come to work every day and feel like they don't know how to talk to their colleagues who are a different race. But in Memphis, particularly, there was a lot of that vibe that people were feeling like there's nothing I can even say. I can't even ask questions. I feel like I'm going to offend somebody. So that's really what we were talking about, is just how do we kind of recenter our interest and our focus on humanity and connection while trying to build a world that we all are going to feel good about living in. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
It does, and actually explains a lot because number one, I did not know they were located in Memphis. And yes, my husband's Cherokee, so we experience our own set of
Mm-hmm.
issues. And I'm retired military. I never experienced any issues in the Navy. I had all nationalities, religions, races, creeds, colors, and we all learned to work together because our group, I was part of Naval Security Group, which is a very small, tight-knit group, and you have each other's backs, and you don't worry about anything else other than, do you have my back? Okay.
Right, right.
So I don't have never experienced any of that. So maybe that's why I
Mm,
didn't understand. It's like, why would you behave any differently? They're still your friends. They're still
mm,
they're still your neighbors. They're still your coworkers. What would you do differently? Except try to
yeah.
support them as well as you could. So that's why when you said that, it's like,
Hmm.
wow. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. There was a lot of tension and conflict around that time, in that area and a lot of areas around the country. But certainly we all have our own experiences, and not everybody did experience that.
Oh, well, I'm glad you were able to help them out because that's sad that anybody would go to work not knowing how to talk to someone you've talked to for years and possibly as your neighbor and coworker, and then suddenly you're afraid to talk to them. That just
Yeah.
that's hard. I don't.
It was a really helpful Q&A. There were lots of questions that folks had. And I think in a way, whenever we're talking about justice issues, not only race, right? But there's a lot of talk about trans issues and sexuality right now. And a lot of times I find that people, especially if you're somebody who kind of, you said something meaning the best and somebody really took offense to it, that can really have a chilling effect. And folks are just afraid to even ask questions. And that's a terrible feeling, right? So I think for a lot of I mean, this was for white folks, a lot of the white folks in the audience, I think it felt good to be able to ask their questions about Black Lives Matter, about racism and racial justice to a white person. I think it felt a little bit safer. So I actually always have said that I think is my role. Sometimes when I was in the academy, people would question, "You're white. Why are you studying race?" Well, of course, I also have a race. We just tend in our culture not to think about whiteness as a race, but of course it is. But also, I think it's really important that people across races are working on equity issues, right? We can't, if white folks, just the majority population, right, just keep going the way that we're going, there's very little hope that things are going to change. We all have to participate in making the world more just. And part of that is having conversations about what that might mean.
Well, I'm glad they have you out there to help with that because this is, I have never seen anything quite like what's happening in our country right now. So
Yeah.
thank you for being a voice.
Yeah.
Now, I know that you, and this is a prime example of how you help people overcome challenges. And especially, I know you help your leaders and your authors overcome challenges.
Yeah.
Have you noticed any kind of common threads in their stories? Is there like some kind of common theme that you've seen?
Well, we tend to draw people who have been through some sort of trauma and then overcome it. So I would say, that's probably the main theme. But what I wonder if would be, interesting for your audience is the main theme that I feel like I see is that authors come to me with these amazing stories. Oftentimes they have so much experience in kind of whatever the area is of their either their trauma or, some related expertise. They know they want to write a book. They know they need to write a book. But oftentimes it's around the time that you take that plunge that you start to really doubt yourself and if you have anything to say. And I would say that is the common thread, is this kind of curse of expertise of not realizing because you talk about that expertise or you lived that story, not realizing how valuable it could be to others. So that is one of the things that I feel like I see a lot and that I really do try to help people work through because there's lots of amazing books that would never be out if nobody ever encouraged those authors to write them.
Well, I'm glad you said that because I experienced kind of the same thing with this podcast when I approach a woman to be a guest, I don't have anything to talk about. Well, you do, or I wouldn't be asking.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
So you hear her, ladies? Step up.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Now,
I like to I'll give you this little nugget. I like to tell people will say like, "Well, who would care about my story?" Nobody cares about my story. And I like to always say, nobody cares because they don't know. You really have no data until you have gotten that story out. You really have no data on whether people care or not. So it's a little bit of a trust fall.
okay, so how can they, because I know that we're going to have a bunch listening to this that I have invited and have said no just for that reason. How
Mhm.
can they use their own personal narratives, their own stories to inspire action and create impact,
Yeah.
especially now when so many, I know that a few of them are afraid because they're afraid of the backlash. They're afraid they'll
Mhm.
be targets. I mean, we see that especially on social media all the time.
Mhm.
How how can they do this? How can they use their narratives safely, I guess would be the word. Or how do they find the courage to put it out there anyway and face what might come of it?
Yeah. There really is no way to protect yourself. And one thing that I am always very honest with our authors. That's really integrity is a key value for me. And one thing I will tell them is there is no scenario where you release a book and every single person likes it. It has never happened, even in the Bible, right? It has never happened. So when you're thinking about putting a book out, part of that is that people are going to criticize it. Now, I have a little different perspective on that as somebody who writes about very controversial issues. What I believe is that if everyone loved your book, it's actually not very successful. The purpose to me of putting out a story that is meant to change the world, and that's who I work with, is that you are starting a conversation, right? So I think the key is finding the sort of boldness to say, I have to say something. Now, I would say if you want to dip your toe in the water, oftentimes using a little bit smaller format. So podcast interviews are a great way to do that. Sounds like there's some people that have had invitations. Maybe you can jump back in and accept the invitation. Articles, shorter articles, even just social media posts, writing your story out, finding a picture that goes with it. You can kind of test the waters a little bit, but really, until you find that you have to get your story out, it's going to be really hard to finish a full book. Books are just hard. It takes a long time. Usually, we recommend people plan at least 10 months for the development and drafting. That doesn't even include the publishing. So you really are in for a long haul. So I think the more that you can build yourself up, speak with your friends, speak with people who are kind of your admirers. I always recommend that folks text their friends. If you're feeling kind of down, text your friends and say, what is the most interesting thing you've ever learned from me? And it's such a boost because people love to do that. Your friends will love to build you up, and it's going to give you that little boost. So I wish that there was a quick way to tell people to find that kind of boldness and bravery, but really the only way out is through. The only thing you can do is just lean in and encourage yourself and build your community who will also lift you up.
Well, it sounds like your last book might have been an excellent example of a book that probably sparked some backlash, I'm sure. Just from what I've read of it so far,
I have no idea because I do not read reviews. Maybe. Nobody's ever come at me personally though. And you're right, it's quite a hot button issue, but really truly, I always tell our authors, don't read the reviews. There is nothing to be gained from reading the reviews. Now, if you are in a Q&A and somebody's asking you a question, I think the most important thing is to remember that you probably feel more defensive than they mean their question to be offensive. That's human nature, right? We feel like, oh my gosh, I'm being confronted. And, that confrontation thing kind of can set off that fight or flight. But typically, if you can approach any challenge like that, if you can approach it with an open heart, really listen to what the person is saying while standing true to yourself, oftentimes you can resolve it without as much drama as you might think. Often, not always, but often.
Well, you've helped dozens of authors publish, and as you said, world-changing books, because that's who you work with. Mm-hmm. What advice would you give to someone who's just starting to write their story, especially now if they're feeling overwhelmed by the process, or they doubt their ability to make an impact, or they think they're not the expert, or they're just, as we've been discussing, terrified of what will come if they put that story out there? Mm-hmm. What advice do you give them?
Well, I will say this is going to depend on kind of who you are, your personality. But what I find works for almost everybody is if you can plan the process to as minute a detail as possible, that will allow you to take the focus off the emotion and put it a little bit more on the process. So that's one thing that we really, really push in the memoir method. And if you're, interested, if you're in this spot and you're interested, you can download our memoir method checklist at pageandpodium.com/checklist. And I also have a YouTube video that's called The 5 Tools You Need to Write Your Memoir. You can check that out on YouTube. I'll send the link too if you want to put that in the show notes. But Really, the main thing that you are going to need is a plan. There is really no world in which you are going to finish a memoir without having sat down and made a plan for what you want to include, where you begin and end, what all is going to go into that process. So have a plan. I think that's going to help you divide out some of that emotion from the actual work of writing.
I've looked at some of your stuff, your books in particular, and I've watched a few of your YouTube videos, and it seems that you talk a lot about identity and leadership. How do you approach these in your coaching and your ghostwriting?
Yeah, I mean, really, we try to just meet people where they are and encourage them to find the unique piece of themselves. The most powerful books are the books that are really authentically and genuinely you. And the most authentic leaders are also the people that are themselves, that are connecting with people. It really can't be a smoke and mirrors thing. I think people feel that, both in speaking and in reading a book. So the biggest thing that we really encourage is for people to be vulnerable. That is easier said than done, but really you are not going to have an impact, especially with memoir, unless you are willing to really be honest even about the stuff that's a little bit scary to share. So that's the main thing I would say is how can we pull you out? How can we put you on the page? That's the most important part.
So, what are some of the most, let's say, important aspects of identity for authors to explore in their storytelling?
Well, the biggest thing is the story is one thing. Usually people are not so interested in just your story, right? The steps. What people are interested in is what your story means. That's what your identity is, right? Your identity is really just a narrative of what your life has been and what you've made it mean. So that's, to me, that's the human experience. And that's what you need to think about. What are the real, true lessons that you learned that you incorporated into how you see the world, how you interact with others, how you think about the future and the past? What are the lessons? What are the truths that are central to who you are? That matters so much more than your race or your gender or your age. What matters is who you are, is what contribution you want to make to the world. And usually that's something that you had to learn yourself as you went through something really difficult.
That is, I don't know. I'm hoping, I'm thinking of some ladies out there that really need to share their stories, and I'm hoping they're listening.
Send them my way. I will talk you into it.
Because their stories need to be told. I am right now
Mhm.
thinking of one or two that have mentioned they'd like to write a book, and it's like, yes, you need to do this. Your story needs to be told.
Yep. There's so many untold stories out there, so many people that are going through something that don't realize that other people have been through it, made meaning of it, figured out how to incorporate it into their identity. We have to get those stories out there. Really, we don't have to get a story out and sell 7 million copies. Most people, when the rubber meets the road, what is so important is that you change people's lives, and that is doable. You might not sell 7 million copies. It is doable to make sure that you change a handful of lives.
And that's what it's all about.
Yep.
My publisher warned me right off the bat. He says, "You're not going to get rich writing books, unless you're like Harry Potter, whatever her name is." Okay.
Yeah. Yep. You have to have a lot of them. If you have a lot of them, it can start, you're still not probably going to get rich. But if you have a lot of them, it's nice when you want to buy a new sweater. But no, it's not thousands of dollars in your mailbox every week. But the authors that I have worked with, really when I, do a catch-up call with them, the things they want to share are not about the copies sold or the number of people at their talks. The things they want to share are I just had a man who got a letter from prison. Somebody had written to him and said, you know what, somebody gave me this book. I grew up in a really similar, he was from the projects outside of Detroit. I grew up in a really similar community. And this was so inspiring to me because I never thought I could write a book, but like you wrote a book. So now I can kind of think about my future in a different way. We have another author who was invited to the White House. She
Whoa.
met with Kamala Harris because she had told her story of running for office unsuccessfully, but she wanted to get it out there and help motivate women to run for office. in doing that, she caught the attention of somebody who introduced her to somebody else who said, "Oh, you're a perfect fit for this program where we're bringing people in to meet with Kamala." So there are a lot of things that can come out of writing your book that have nothing to do with the metrics that we tend to think about, that are really more about what's the impact you can have on others, what are the really cool experiences you can have because you told that story.
It definitely opens doors.
It does.
Well, you have navigated both academia and now you're an entrepreneur. And as a woman who has done both, we know there's been some unique challenges. Let's be real. I have a whole
Yep.
podcast episode about that, ladies. Okay. How have these experiences shaped the way that you mentor and coach women leaders? Because I know you do both, you said. So how do you work with women differently because of your own experiences?
Yeah, well, I am a mentor at heart. That is really the thing that I have wanted out of every career choice I've ever had. Before that, I was a children's theater actor. So I've done all of these things, but really what I want to do is interact with people and honestly just love on people and uplift people. And that is central to my mentoring, no matter the gender. But one thing that I do think is important, especially when I'm mentoring women, business owners or freelancers, is you have to really make sure that you are setting boundaries, that you are holding to yourself. One of the things that I think we are taught as women is that we should be so others focused, that it's selfish to say, I need this and I will not tolerate this, or, whatever it may be for you. We're kind of taught that we're not really allowed to do that, or doing that makes you a selfish person. One of the things that I really work with, especially when I'm working with business owners, is you can say no. You have to say no. When you say yes to everything, you just deplete so much energy that you not only are not serving the people you're saying yes to, you're also not serving yourself. You're not protecting the asset, which is you, right? You have a unique thing to share. And the more you are just giving that away indiscriminately, the less valuable the contribution you make to your community, to your family, to society. So I think the biggest thing is realizing that part of standing in your truth, part of standing in your story is understanding that you are valuable too, not only the people you're serving, but you are. So what do you need to be the happiest, healthiest version of yourself? And often you need to say no more.
That I was going to ask you to say something inspiring to the women out there. I think that was pretty much it.
Good.
Seriously, that's if you can't do any more than that. Just yes, but there we are.
Yeah, it's easy. It's easier said than done. I just said no to somebody today and I don't feel great about it, but I do know it was the right choice. I know when I evaluate the opportunity with my values and my goals, it wasn't a good fit. I had to say no. I did give him some other referrals, some other people to ask. So
Well, that
spread
always,
it around that way.
well, that makes it better.
A little bit. It makes you feel a little better if you can at least send them to somebody else. But regardless, that temporary bad feeling of saying no, that won't last. But if you say yes to all this stuff, the resentment of overdoing it for other people, that does last.
Been there. I used to be a very big yes person. Okay. Of
Yeah,
course.
me too.
Sure, yes, I'll do that.
Me
And
too.
you can't. You can't do it all. So I appreciate you standing up and telling ladies it's okay to say no.
Yep.
Well, Amanda, this has been great, and like I said, I'm hoping that some of those ladies out there that have talked to me about how much they want to write their story are listening, and
Yes.
I'm going to put that link in the notes so that they can reach out to you if they want to.
Perfect.
Because she can help you, ladies. She can absolutely help you get your book out there and get that story out of you. And her book, The Summer of 2020, George Floyd and the Resurgence of the Black Lives Matter Movement, is available on Amazon. I'm reading it right now. I'm not going to say it's an easy read because it tackles some very tough topics, but it really does make you think, and it makes you look at things just a little differently. Like I said, I have never experienced a lot of the things that other people talk about just because I don't want to say I've lived an insulated life, but because of my own experiences, just some of the conversations we're having, I just don't understand. That's like, what's
Yeah.
the problem here? I don't get it. So it was a very eye-opening book for me. So I hope you will grab it and read it as well, especially if you have questions about what is this all about. And yes, so thank you for being part of this, getting on our little podcast with us. Everybody out there, you know the drill. Like, share, comment, hit that notifications button, whatever. Do the stuff because I'm not very techy, as you know. So I count on a lot of you to help me get this out there. So do the thing, ladies. Do the thing. And we will see you all next episode. Amanda, thank you so much.
Thank you.